computer. Hello, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. It's so great to see you.
Great to see you as well. I love those welcoming hellos. So I'm going to say what I always say. We're still on the Sermon on the Mount. And
Yes,
if Jesus knew we were going to stand here so long, he would have got us some reclining chairs.
that's
We,
that.
we again, it's somewhat meant to, it's because of our dereliction that we're still here. But perseverance adds up, and this is like year 2 or so. We are there, and maybe we could see the end of the mountain in the future. Okay, but today we'll start as we do with you reading. We'll start on 7:7.
Thank you, Rabbi. On that note, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 7, verse 7 onwards. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake?
Okay, I think maybe we'll call it there. What impactful words. Very exciting to talk about this. So first, we'll just note this is not our the first time that we're on the Mount that we're talking about prayer, right?
Mhm.
We already talked about prayer in 6:5 in chapter 6, 5-8. That's when we spoke about hypocrites praying in secret or at least privately. And we talked about how ironic is how churches are so big and mega churches are possibly the opposite of what Matthew preaches in 6:5. And it kind of says that prayer 6:8, do not be like them. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask. And some people interpret that as like, really, Christians shouldn't have to pray. It almost is a waste of time. If God cares for you as we believe, then what is prayer really accomplishing? So today, I feel like this is part 2 of Sermon on the Mount of talking about prayer. And well, if part 1 was hypocritical, talking about hypocrites or giving a pejorative attitude towards prayer, I think this one is like a super positive attitude and a really another side of the coin of prayer.
So, Rabbi, if you were to go 2,000 years back when this was said, and let's say his primary audience were Jewish, and where the Jewish again keeping kosher, keeping Shabbos was that's the way of life was living,
I
and
love
so
that you say Shabbos. That's the
Shabbos,
best. Your
yes.
Ashkenazi pronunciation of words really is the best thing that your background could do in this situation. I love that.
Thank you. He's speaking with an audience who kept Shabbos, who kept kosher, and telling them don't pray. Or part of folks again at that time, tithing was very important. Folks prayed all the time in the temple, and in that sense, telling them you don't have to pray. Your Father knows about this. Wouldn't this have come across as being what's the term you want to say? It's not no shoot.
It'd be
It's
like anathema. It'd be like outside norm. So again, like I don't want to say like he didn't say that in 6:5, because even if you look at 6:9, it says pray then in this way. It does say that you should pray. It just has like pray in secret. Don't be like the hypocrites who just say lots of praises. It was really like maybe a negative attitude towards the Pharisees or other Jews. So again, I don't think it's accurate to say don't pray. But again, that was back then. I think over here in 7:7, 100% it does have a more positive attitude than whatever you want to say took place in 6:5-8 and then 6:9-15. This is more positive. But I guess if you wanted to, you can ask, as it says, I say to you, ask, as it says, it's not obviously talking about prayer, right? And maybe before you even analyze this, I'll do the inquisitive point, Isaac, and say, what is prayer? So if I say to you as a good Christian, and I say, define for me prayer, not what you do in church, not what you do on the weekend, just tell me academically, what is prayer to you, Isaac?
So academically, it'll just be praying. We'll be talking to a different being, a heavenly being. Um, so as human beings, we talk to each other. We can have a conversation, and I think when we talk with God, whom we call as a holy other, then this form of conversation is what we call
Okay,
prayer.
so you would
It's a
say
label. It's a label.
talking or conversating with an invisible being.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I interrupt you. What else you're about to say?
No,
Labeling.
I think that's exactly so. It's so a conversation with a being. We would label those conversations as prayer, as in, um,
Okay, so that's interesting. How I feel that's a I would respond to you by saying that sounds a little minimalist for a
okay.
good Christian, Isaac. That sounds like an average Christian to me. In that, um, no, because you're saying talking. I think most of your co-religionists, which would add to that and say it's more than just talking. Talking 100% is part of prayer, but they might say it's asking God for stuff. That might be prayer, but you might say that's just talking. Or they might say praising
Yeah.
God. You might just say it's talking. But what happens if I maybe I'm saying what you're saying, but adding to it. Maybe I just agree with you. I just agree. Say talking, and I'm just saying different kinds of talk. Okay, so I think that's a really good way. So when you're praying, it's just different forms of talk. Okay, so I
Yeah.
actually I like that definition.
Different forms of conversation, which could either asking could be a part of it, lament could be a part of it, praising can be a part of
Okay,
it,
so
thankfulness.
let's
So
let's let's break it down into the three categories, or three at least. Like there's three either metaphors or categories that are said in Matthew and 7:7, right? It says ask, which means to make a request, and then says it'll be given to you. We'll talk about the response in a second. So there's asking, and then there's searching, which means to seek out, and then there is knocking. So what's really interesting, on the one hand, there's different ways to understand this. One way you could say is that here are just three examples of prayer. That's one option. Another option is, I think the very rejected Gnostic belief was here are three kind of meditative kind of aspects. First you ask, and then you seek, and then you knock. That's another way to look at it. But I will say, like, asking is kind of, I think, much more the standard kind of prayer we talk about. I want a new car, God. God says no. And then when you say seek, though, I did when I see the word seek, I do recognize it as something that we see in Genesis 25:22 when when Rebecca was having troubles with her twin pregnancy. It does say that the verse says, "If so, why do I exist?" She went to inquire, which the Hebrew word is darash, to seek of God. So generally, at least in the rabbinic tradition, we see over there seeking could either mean prayer or it can mean talking to a prophet to understand God's way. So I think the first two, asking and searching, have this element of prayer, but knocking kind of opens up the door. I think most people, if you say, can you give me your top 10 metaphors for prayer? No one's going to say knock. I think searching even is like a middle category. When people say search out God, they generally view that as maybe prayer study, prayer circle, intellectual study of
mhm.
what is God philosophically. How does He act? How does prayer work? How, like that. I think that is more when we think seek. We don't generally associate with seek, but you at least have that ambiguous nature. But knocking, I think, is hard to imagine that is a formal part of prayer. So I think this is something that we have to, like, I view this at least as in three successive ways to view things. First, you should ask of God. That is one thing, things you want. Next, if you're going to ask, you really have to understand what you're asking, and you have to seek out God to understand that bilateral relationship. And third, when you have a knocking, for every knock and the door will be opened, that's more, and like it's really interesting. When you knock, you're inherently placing yourself geographically outside of the space of the relationship. There's a door separating you. And when you knock, you're saying, I'm on the outside. I'm external. I don't have access to the holy abode, to the heavens or whatever. And you're asking to come inside. So it's interesting. Is this saying that I want to be on the other side? Is it saying that you just need to do a physical act and that's all you need? So it's really interesting how this fits into the idea. If this is in fact prayer, what in fact is it?
What he's saying is asking is the act of asking, as in, Rabbi, I want this. Seeking, what he's saying is that searching, or so seeking, you're saying is to understand God's perspective on something, on the ask. Is that what I heard you say? I said,
So I'm noting it's ambiguous because it's like when you look at the second half of the line, seek and you will find. So it does have this like positive element saying that, like, if you do it, you're going to get a response. So I think that's why people will view this in the context of prayer. But I think it's ambiguous. It could be seek intellectually, seek through thought, or it might be seek God to go pray. When you pray to God, that's a form of seeking. So I don't feel comfortable saying one.
So could this also be could be that God bless my efforts as I'm doing some work, and a form of coming those efforts, seeing this effort come to fruition, or God, a form of prayer is God making those efforts come to fruition. So asking, it's more verbal. Seeking is asking Him to bless the whatever work once one is doing. I think of knocking as a mode of understanding. So I'm intrigued why you put knock. When you said knock and the door would be opened. I look to your point. I think of that you bring up a great point, as in you place oneself geographically outside of God or outside of Him, and there's something separating the person from God, and that could be both intellectual or physical. Well, maybe intellectual or
and it
anything
might just be a metaphor for prayer, right?
else.
Pray and you'll get in. So we might be thinking too hard about it. So we have these three. And when you look at the second half, of each of these lines, there's almost a enzyme and a coenzyme.
Can I ask you, so before we go there, so on the topic of door, so as a Jewish person, before you walk in through a door, I think I've heard you say you probably bless the place, or you say a prayer, something along those lines, right?
Well, so one of our later sources I could bring up right now is that doors have two imports in Judaism, at least I think from a halakhic, a religious perspective. Number one, 100%, even though the Bible says you should put mezuzot, you should put probably poetically put something on your mezuzot, which means your threshold or your lintels. So rabbinic tradition interprets that you should put a little scroll on your doorpost. So you definitely have that aspect. But I think what's interesting about this exact line is that the Talmud notes multiple times. I think the most famous time is in Nida 16a, which is like a source that you're not allowed to walk into a space before you knock. And my wife has like this, I'd say OCD kind of thing, that even if she knows I'm home, even if she knows I'm expecting her, she'll knock 3 times, because as a Jewish practitioner, she was raised like, even if you're about to walk in, you need to make sure people are aware of it, even if it's not surprising to them. So it's almost like an annoying OCD. Like I know she's coming back in the house in 1 second. You're still going to hear the knock, because there's this idea that God is unhappy when people come in unannounced. So knocking has this, the line we have, Rabbi Akiva taught his son, Rabbi Yeshua, 7 things. And one of them is, don't enter your house suddenly, all the more so someone else's house. You should always knock. So we see that knocking has this making yourself known to the other person, so not surprise. So again, I'm not sure if that parallel really exists by God as much, but it could be that it's a kind of a sign of reverence also of God, that, if you knock, if you understand you're on the outside, if you understand there's a door, if you understand that you just take the active step to engage, to do, then there will automatically be a divine response.
But he does not say how long. He does not say how long you have to knock, or how, so
I know it's long enough to make yourself known. Don't go surprising folk. So when you look at the other side of it, and even before we get to verse 8, ask and it'll be given you. Search and you'll find. Knock. So in other words, Jesus is saying you're going to be super successful. Why are Christians not asking all the time? Jesus puts his promise right here. I'm sort of now saying, I want a brand new car. Ask and you'll be given.
But that's not said here, right? So you use the word successful, but that's not, the word successful is nowhere, that's more
what is Isaac, what does given mean to you?
So it says ask and to be given, but again, it does not say.
So what are you given? Just tell me. I'm here. Let's say let's make a test case. Isaac, give me something you're asking for. God, give me enlightenment. God, give me a car, whatever. So when it says given, what does the word given, the verb, mean to you, Isaac, in that sentence?
Yeah. So in that sense, I probably received something. It's given to me. Like I received this. I think what's missing here is
wait. Receive what? I'm not understanding.
So receive in the case of, if it's enlightenment, in that case, a form of enlightenment, or if it's health, it's a form of health.
So you are given something. You're saying
you do.
So you're given something.
It could be, right. So because this verse is so broad, it's so vague. It has no qualifiers. It does not say how long. It does not say.
This sounds like heresy. I don't know. You're like, oh, this isn't apologetic. It's true, but maybe in 7 lifetimes, we
So
were
no,
dead 200 years.
no, so here's my question, right? So these verses here are so broad. I mean, they aren't specific to anyone. Like, ask it to be given. To your point, we're asking me, like, ask, like, what will be given. It depends on what's been asked, but it doesn't have any qualifiers.
When
It
Jesus
comes,
wrote that, he knew that it was ambiguous. He's okay
yeah.
to a qualifier.
And so it comes across to me as a broad principle, as in, hey, generally, if you ask, it will be given, but it does not mention the qualifiers or what's
I
involved
know. I
in
feel you're only saying that because when you wish for a car or you ask God for a car, you don't get a car the next day. I feel if you heard this on the spot, you may not feel that way. But like when you look at it, it's really interesting. So what you're talking about is the efficacy of prayer. So I think when we talk about asking will be given, searching you'll find, knock on the door will be opened. Let's take a step back. And when I ask you what is prayer, and you said speak or talk, and now I think that's a really great definition of invisible. When it says when we talk about what prayer is meant to accomplish, what is prayer meant to accomplish? So let me ask you that also as we'll throw out the good Christian phrase. As a good Christian, what is prayer meant to accomplish for you when you pray?
That's a good question. So, from as a non-academic, right? So we've established prayer as a form of
Yeah, now we're asking you, not an academic. Yeah.
so prayer is a form of conversation, and so I think as human beings, we're meant to be social beings. We are formed in context of our relationships, and so the act of praying does change a person. In terms of how it changes, I don't know. Christian perspective is you become Christ-like, become Christ-like in what you do, but it's more of a gradual process. So I think again, human beings cannot live in isolation. We're all meant to live in community. We're social beings. We need each other, and so prayer is a form of conversing with that holy being, and that act of conversing changes a person. I cannot say it's for one end goal. A Christian perspective would say to become
Okay,
Christ-like,
so
but
when you,
that's
so two things. One second. So you're saying a lot of things. So number one, I just want you to first note, the word lehit palel in Hebrew to
Mhm,
pray is actually a reflexive word. It's
mhm.
not a verb that you're doing, it's something that you do to yourself. So this is like, philosophically very interesting. And I think it's kind of what you're saying. When you pray, you're changing yourself. A lot of times in Jewish commentaries, they'll focus, well, maybe if you pray, you make yourself better Jew. And therefore, when you ask for something, you have like a different now kind of understanding of God, different perspective. Now you're a different person. Now God owes you differently. That's sometimes how prayer is viewed. But you're saying more than that. You're saying not only is prayer reflexive, but if you do it right, you're becoming more God-like. I feel you're
Yes,
saying.
yes, yes.
Because does God pray?
I don't know.
How are you more godlike? Unless God is also praying, how are you more godlike by praying?
So, so again, prayer is a form of conversation. So I think through our conversation, so if I put this in simple words, because Rabbi Rasna had a conversation, I'm a different person now than I was when this call started because I have some more understanding, deeper, a different perspective, or different views, and so so conversation is what human beings do. We converse, and so we applied prayer as a form of conversation, and I would talk to God, and so He does talk back or respond, so maybe answering to prayers or some form of that would be a form of
It's
response to
interesting because
prayer.
the verse doesn't say, the verse says, you'll be given, you'll find, you'll open for you. It actually is kind of still focused on the individual. It's not saying, and I will give to you. It's the passive voice. It will be given. You will find. The door
So
will be
this
open.
was so this was my earlier point. So was he just making broad principles, stating a very broad principle, asking it will be given at your point? He
I
does
feel
not say,
like you're asking, how does the Sermon on the Mount work? And I'm not sure I can. I think only year 5 will I feel comfortable answering that kind of question. I'm only in year 2.
Yeah, too. I think we've left off was, he was speaking about the kingdom of God. In his mind, kingdom of God has come, here it is. And so he's saying, go live in the kingdom of God. And so my question to you would be, is he saying that this is a principle of the coming kingdom? What a kingdom he meant, as in you're living in that
So you
kingdom.
never know that. That's such a good question, Isaac, but we never know the answer to that. Is he speaking about a messianic future, or is he speaking about a observational reality? This is how it works. So we don't know. Is he only talking to his followers who really live up to his definition of a good Jewish Christian? Or is he speaking to people and they're like, and you're not gonna ask and receive because you guys aren't living up to my my definition of success? Okay, these are all good questions that I don't think we can answer.
So on that point, so in our earlier conversations, right, we noticed that John the Baptist and Jesus, they both were living in this mess as the kingdom of God is here. Repent, like so you bring up a point. Are they making an observational question or a question about the messianic kingdom? I would want to think it's more of the messianic kingdom because that's the reality he's living in. He is not so much concerned about
But
the
he
day.
recognizes there's still pain and death and suffering and all these things.
Yeah.
So it could be, does the messianic kingdom happen only once he dies? Does it only happen during his life? These things are unclear, right? And we talked about John Dominic Crossan, how he sees it very, very differently even than even the messianic era. So taking a step back again, one of the questions I think that you keep like hovering around is, what is the efficacy of prayer? And I just want to give you like maybe a 10-second introduction, not 10, a couple second introduction. You know, a lot of times these questions are kind of taken for granted. If you ask a first century Jew, has prayer work? He just say it works. And he may not actually have a deeper philosophical understanding. But over the next 1,000 years, especially once we get to medieval philosophy, and especially once we get to Maimonides, who spends like a long time talking about these things, we really get this idea of like, how does prayer work? And I told you one Jewish belief that maybe prayer works because you're a different person, and then you're fitting for something else. But one of the famous commentaries on Maimonides, a guy named Marvin Fox. So in his understanding of prayer, he held that there's like this incommensurability to an intellectual understanding of prayer and tradition. So what that means is that for some people, prayer doesn't work. But like I kept thinking, you kept saying like these two aspects. One, it makes you more like God. Number two, there's this community that needs prayer. From an evolutionary perspective, people cry out to the invisible and they need it. So if religion works on both sides, maybe prayer on the one hand, at least for Marvin Fox in reading of Maimonides, you had that he held that Maimonides, Rambam felt that prayer is necessary for the masses. They need it, but maybe like you can't change God. God is God. God is this power that's unmovable, unchangeable. So that's one aspect. Generally, that's going to be rejected in the Christian world, and I think in the Jewish world as well. If you look at any source in the Talmud, we actually talked about at one time on the Babylonian Talmud on Talmud 19a. We talked about Choni Hama'agel, Onias the circle maker, that he one time insisted that God make rain, and he drew a circle around himself. He says, "Until you do that, I'm not moving." And again, that was I don't know what the right word is prayer, but it's petitionary, and it was like militantly requested, and eventually started raining. God listened. So in that situation, we see that his talking, his conversation, his request, his petition was something that God listened to. So you have that. He's generally viewed as a first century BCE. Like I know we talk about different models of Jesus. He's viewed as the miracle worker parallel to Jesus. So if God intervenes, is that just a miracle? Is God changing the natural order, or did God set up the natural order to make it that the natural order responds? I think in the post scientific revolution, we generally don't look at religion, or we don't look at God as like intervening outside of science as much. You know, when you look into those pastors, like we see a miracle happen, they'll say a miracle happened outside of science. No, like most people don't say today, some people do, that a baby born is a miracle. When they mean that, they mean it as like a metaphor, because no one looks at a cow when it's born and says it's a miracle. They say, oh, a kid. So it is a little bit more miracle. So I think when we look at prayer, we have to first break it down as, does it work? And if it works, how do you do it? And even though we had obviously in the 6th chapter how you're supposed to pray, and we obviously have the Lord's Prayer and other prayers. And then once we say it does work, I think when we look over here, and this is why I think where Matthew and Jesus always acting, let's be honest, a little subversively, I think we see that right now. So asking will be given. So we all recognize if you ask something, it's not automatically given. And we obviously all agree that if you search, you're not automatically going to find. And we all, whatever the metaphor is knocking, we all assume that if you knock, you're not automatically open. This is what you're saying. There's something happening here. You could be an apologist like you were. It can happen sometime. You could be a literalist and say, it's something happened I can't see. It works at the micro level. Or you can say it's a metaphor and it's happening, but like, you know, I can't. But when you look at verse 9 and 10, I think a lot of times Jesus says something, and if you just had that statement and stopped there, you would think one thing. But when you see the parable that he presents right next to it, you realize that we didn't understand it at all. And I think this is another example of that. And what's interesting, this happens in Matthew and Luke. Like this is kind of like fact. When you look at Luke 11, 9 through 13, like this is almost word for word the same thing. And not only that, I think this was such a message when you see 7-7. I'm not even sure what 7-8 adds. Like listen to them, you put them next to each other. I know I pointed out to you one time where I felt that there were two stories that got put next to each other that were identical stories. And said they wanted to keep both in. And I feel when you look at this one, it kind of feels the same. When you put them next to each other. Ask and you'll be given. The next verse says, for everyone who asks receives, searching you'll find, everyone who searches finds. And then the last line, and knock and the door will be opened. Everyone who knocks, the door open. I feel that's repetitive. I don't think 7-8 adds anything. I think that sometimes the New Testament repeats itself because it was so worried about losing traditions. Don't forget the way it was edited and written down. So I'm just going to I'm not even sure what 7-8 adds. I'm just going to say it says roughly 7. But when you look at 7, 9, and 10, again, has two more parables, which probably I would guess that 7-7 lines up with 7-9 and 7-8 lines up with 7-10. That's why there's two parables right here that almost say identical things. So there's two lines lined up. So let's read it. And then Isaac, I'll listen to your explanation, then I'll see what I can add. So 7-9.
Yeah, Rabbi. So 7 and 8, right? To your point, they both are identical, or 8 does not add much value in a
Well, I'm not here to say what adds value. I'm just saying, like, to me, they look like they were an editor's choice to stick them next to each other because they didn't want to lose the tradition. And I think the same thing about 7, 9, and 10. That I think 7-7 lines up 7-9 and 7-8 lines up 7-10.
So is a goal. So was it common in that time to repeat something twice? And this is very important, right? So there was it says truly.
Common that time.
Truly,
three little pigs. The wolf does this. The wolf does that. The wolf does, Red Riding Hood. A, B, C. So over here, I don't think they're trying to put that. I don't think that's identical to the rule of 3. I think over here, when Matthew was written down, they were very worried about losing traditions. And some of the stuff here, they took from multiple positions or traditions, and they didn't want to lose it. So I think the story, we talked about this in regards to Jesus meeting his followers in the water, that I'm not convinced those are two separate stories. Okay, but let's read 7, 9, 7, 10 and give you a chance to see what you think. So what does he say after 7, 8? It says, is there anyone among us who, if your child asks for bread, will give a stone? And then I would say the next line is roughly the same. Is there anyone, or if the child asks for a fish, we'll give him a snake, or in Luke, if the child asks for an egg, we'll give a scorpion. So Luke, we have a little bit different. We don't have the bread one in Luke, but it's roughly the same concept. You ask for something that's meaningful, food, need it for your life. The kid is hungry, obviously. The kid wants something, and you give him something that's either detrimental, dangerous, or worthless. That's the parable. So what do you make of it, Isaac?
Yeah, so my mind immediately goes to what's happening in the Middle East right now. As said, so when he says ask, so he only quotes about ask as in, so the 7 and 8 had 3, like ask, seek, and knock, right? Ask and you'll be given, seek and you will find. But 9 and 10 only have the word ask in it. Ask in this, as in, it does not have the word. It does not have the word seek or knock, right? And so I wonder again, was he was 7 and 9 trying to re-emphasize versus 7? Were 9 and 10 trying to highlight 7 and 8 by using examples of bread and stone and fish and snake, when I don't think he literally meant if you ask bread, that if you ask for bread, will someone give you a stone? If you ask for fish, will give him a snake. He was trying to be rhetorical to get the point across. At least that's the way I view this. As in, he was trying to be rhetorical to get the point. What
was the point?
That the kingdom of God, at least in his view, the Messianic kingdom, the principle is ask it to be given, seek it, you will find, knock, and the door will be open to you.
Okay.
It's as though he's saying there's some invisible force which will, because to your point, he does not say, I will give this to you, but he says, I get the impression he's stating that if you do this, there's like a sort of if-then rule. And I viewed 9 and 10 of trying to re-emphasize, or to just to be rhetorical, to highlight 7 again. What do you think?
So I think it's very surprising, to say the least. I think that if it stopped after 7-8, then we wouldn't be surprised. I think that when you see this, it's very surprising. So first of all, who cares? Is anyone among you, if a child asks for bread, will give him a stone? Like, who's he saying this to? Like, yeah, correct. If a kid needs something or a kid wants something, is hungry, you wouldn't do the thing that's worthless to them. So I think when you apply this parable to 7-7, it's saying that you're going to ask for things, and I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to give you bad things. I'm going to give you what you need. It doesn't say even in the parable, I'll give you bread. Obviously, the person, like we've seen multiple times in the Sermon on the Mount, it's saying that God will give you what you need. If a kid asks for bread, he's not going to hurt you. He's going to give him the thing you need. But it doesn't say if you ask for a car, you get a car. It doesn't mean if you give him $1 billion. It says, like in other places we've seen multiple times on the Sermon on the Mount, you're going to get exactly what you need. Just like we say in 6:8, do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask them.
So would you say that this aspect of getting what folks need, is that a broad principle in the Messianic kingdom, or is that something that applies
I mean,
to?
it's definitely, again, we have different models of this. We had the example that God makes sure birds eat what they need to. There's all these examples that where, for example, we see in 6:30, but if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will not be much more. So it's saying that God clothes the grass of the sea, God takes care of the lilies in the field. God does all these things. It seems to be that the way I read this, just like the other places in the sermon, that God takes care of you. And you may ask, you'll be given, but you're not going to be given in any way what you're asking for. You're not going to be given what you seek. You're not going to get what you knock for. You have to take these action steps. You have to engage in this bilateral relationship. But is there among you that asks for bread and gets stones? I'm not. It's saying that I'm not going to mess you over. Don't worry about it. I'm not the kind of person who, when a child asks for fish, gives a snake. I'm going to take care of things. But it doesn't mean if you ask, you'll be given, and you're given. You'll be given, and we were discussing what the extra words are. You'll be given what I say you need. When you seek, you'll find what I say you should find. When you knock, the door will be opened for what I want you to see. Nothing more. You need to ask, you need to seek, you need to knock, but you don't have to get what you want. And I think that is one of the themes of the Sermon on the Mount. And you're asking the Messianic question about how it's supposed to be in the Messianic era. I don't know the answer. I think there's too many answers in the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition to know. Judaism has no clue. Judaism's Maimonides says over and over, we don't have an authentic tradition of what's going to happen in the Messianic era. When you read the stories in the Talmud, you should take them as stories. Some might be right when the time happens, and we could take our checklist out and check it, but we don't know. So that's what I think is happening over here, and we'll see 7-11. But what's interesting, I think, is that Judaism Judaism has a very different tradition. I don't think Judaism takes the attitude of it definitely gets the attitude like, there's this idea of divine influence and you'll get what you need. But when you look at certain Jewish traditions, I just want to throw out like 2 or 3, and just for a point of comparison, Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah, he quotes, brings this down from Talmudic sources. He says, I'll read it to you in English. He says this in 8:1 rules of prayer. Communal prayer is always heard. Even when there are transgressors among the congregation, the Holy One, blessed be, does not reject the prayers of the many. So we have this ambiguous. We have prayers heard, it's not rejected. Next, we also have that we, in the Talmud, it says in Brachos 6a, that God stands with the congregation of God in the midst of judges. And we learn from that if you have 10 people together, God hears prayers. What you see in the Jewish tradition, I think, is really interesting to see in stark contrast to what you see here. The Jewish traditions focus on, are you in a community? Do you have enough people? Do you have the right place? Do you have the right time? What happens if you say the wrong words? You got to repeat your prayer. What happens if you added one extra? What happens if you missed this one sentence we're supposed to say? Okay, doesn't matter. What happens if everything is much more legalistic, focus on what is right and what's wrong? And while Jesus obviously has the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6:9 through 15, there isn't this focus on the legalism. There's a focus on asking you'll be heard. So in other words, you should know that you should be engaged in asking and seeking and knocking and prayer, but it doesn't matter as much how you do it. Where Judaism wants you to be in the room with the 10 people, with the congregation, to not isolate yourself. Jesus, if anything, is advocating isolation in 6:5 through 6:8.
Yeah, but he does not. You bring up a good point, right? As in, the Lord's Prayer, does it come across as you pray in isolation, or to your point,
Well, today you do it in church, so it's not. And I know you do it in your house as well, but at least there's definitely a more attitude of isolationist, seclusion, individualism. And what I think the main point I see in the difference is that while Christianity, or at least Matthew, will focus on you'll get what you need, Judaism will focus on the legalistic and the ritual and the community when it thinks of prayer and seeking out. There's no really like, if you want your prayer to be heard, listen to this line. This line is it's crazy to hear. You probably think it sounds crazy. Communal prayer is always heard, even when they're transgressors among the congregation. The Holy One, blessed be, does not reject the prayer of the many. What happens if you get 10 murderers together? Maimonides is saying that prayer is a prayer that's heard. Again, whatever heard means. So I think like when you hear this, therefore, a person should include himself in the community and should not pray alone, whether he is able to pray when he's able to pray with the community. Anyone who has a synagogue in a city and does not pray together, the congregation in it, is called a bad neighbor. A lot of times the prayer is more focused on the community and the legalism, where Jesus is more focusing not on that, but the understanding that God's going to do what's best for you no matter what you do.
That's a great observation. So it sounds like you're saying he places a greater responsibility on the individual, as in,
Well, at least definitely Matthew 6:5 does. Over here, I feel this is more the intellectual, the aspect of prayer that's focused on is the intellectual understanding that your prayer is almost like your prayer is funny, because your prayer, God's gonna give you what you need. Ask and you'll get. What are you gonna get? Don't worry, I'm not gonna throw snakes at you. Don't worry, I'm not gonna throw scorpions at you. Don't worry, I'm not gonna throw rocks at you. I'm not gonna make it valueless. I'm gonna make it meaningful, but you're still only gonna get what you need. Not what like I think like in certain traditions, there's almost this irony. I prayed for a wife, I got a wife, and she ruined my life. I prayed for a car, I got my car, and I got in a crash and I killed people. So you almost like sometimes God will give you stuff just to kind of test you. So I feel like that tradition is not happening here. You don't get more than you need. You get what you need. You ask and you'll get, but you'll get what you need. And I think it's purposely left out the end of that sentence. Ask and you'll get, because you're going to get, and you'll understand. It's like an ambiguous.
So what he's saying is, you ask, you will get what you need, not what you ask for.
Right.
What happens?
Exactly.
Yeah. What happens if you don't ask? So if you don't ask, right? Because he says,
I agree. You're still gonna get it. 100%, because God does that which is righteous and that which is correct.
Okay. So then why?
So again, if anything, that's why we should look back at 6:5. 6:5, where it says 6:8, do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need. When you're praying, do not heap up empty phrases that the Gentiles do. They not think they will, for they think that they will be heard because they're many words. These, I think, are somewhat polemics against the Pharisees and against other people who do things in futile. I pray a lot of times words I don't know what they mean, because I view that it's ritualistic. I try to understand every day a little bit more of my prayer. But there's all time these, like, a lot of times in Psalms, when I'm reading Psalms, I'm like, oh my God, this poetry is killing me. I don't know what this means.
But Rabbi, so in some
and that's
ways,
okay for me.
In some ways, I'm also ritualistic. I grew up in the Anglican Church. We have the Book of Common Prayer, which is.
Well, we're not going to analyze how the Anglican Church keeps Matthew's word.
No, but
that's not where we're here.
Yes, but the point is that, so within Christianity also, there's a strong strand where we have ritualistic prayers we say every week or every other week. I do not know if I can say I know every word I pray. I mean, sometimes I have. I cannot say
again, that. I think traditions evolve, right? And when I read Matthew 6:5 to 6:8, I can't believe a church exists. I find that a church should be hypocritical. He calls the people who go to those places hypocritical. It just seems that churches should not, and certain traditions have that. You pray by yourself. Obviously Muslims have mosques, but you see all the time, they pray by themselves. And I think the idea of praying by yourself, I had a rabbi once who told me that you just heard how many times that it says it's so good to pray in a community. He used to say, I pray once a week by myself on purpose because that's meaningful to me. And I think I said to him joking, like, well, your prayer may not be heard. And he goes, I'm okay with that. So I think that this idea that to worry about the hypocrisy of prayer is something that Christians, at least about Matthew, is very concerned about.
So what he's saying is, so this verse is subversive in the sense that it places greater responsibility on, it places a greater emphasis on individual prayer, or it does not make any, it does not reference communal prayer, right?
Well, I think,
Communal
yeah, it definitely communal prayer, but that I would say that's already clear in 6:5 to 8. I think over here, it's more saying that when you, if a kid wants bread, I'm not going to hurt him. He's going to get the things he needs. So you should know when you ask, I'm going to give you the things you need. I'm not going to hurt you, and it's okay. So I think that's the reason that this would have been kind of surprising. I think the first person who heard, is there any among you, if your child asks for bread, will give a stone? Like they're like, what? No one would do that. And the answer is, you should understand that. Okay, Isaac, I think we're gonna call it a day.
Well, on that note, I'm praying for peace in the Middle East. Pray that the peace will, that's all we can pray for. Now, maybe to your point, I can pray for peace. I do not know, to your point, we do not know what we'll receive. I hope we can, there's some form of peace. And so, so when you keep like when you said that we can ask what we want, but God will give us what we need. It sounds like it touches upon deeper questions about God's, about who is God, His sovereignty, or is it preordained as to what people, or maybe we can table that for a further discussion. But the point here we're saying is the focus is upon each on each individual, and then asking and seeking and knocking. But they may or may not get what they ask for, but they will get what they need to live, to
Right.
live life.
Right. And again, we're kind of breaking the parable in the middle. So, we'll see next time 7-Eleven, which is really the ending of this line. So maybe we'll just do a quick conversation on 7-Eleven to finish off to see how, like, it's unfair of us to break the parable in the middle, but we are. Okay. To be continued, Isaac.
It's good to see you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Absolutely.